we are going to be talking about doing business in the Americas, or rather the challenges of doing business in the America at the moment from a freight perspective. And just want to draw your attention to a message from Nathan Ellier, who's the acting head of the Post for Global Victoria for North America. He's currently managing the trade and investment team based in the US. And of course, there is a whole raft of trade commissioners available to you in various parts of the world and in North America, particularly if you need any information about what is happening on the ground, if you need assistance, market intelligence, anything of that nature, then by all means reach out to Nathan. There are 11 staff in the US based in offices located in San Francisco, New York, Chicago, Washington, DC, and Boston. And the role of the North American team is to attract foreign direct investment into Victoria, while also providing in-market support for our Victorian-based stakeholders. The North American team provides dedicated support across all of Victoria's key sectors, and that includes agriculture, tech, medtech, pharma, defence, advanced manufacturing, and energy. And of course, due to COVID, all services are currently being presented virtually via Zoom. The support of Victorian-based organisations who want to conduct business in North America has remained steady, and there's a strong complement of staff ready to service your needs. And there you can see a closer picture of the sorts of things and the sorts of sectors that are being provided in North America for Victorian businesses. And then, of course, also in the Americas, Natalie Gorono, who is the acting head of Post for Latin America, and she manages the trade and investment team based out of Chile. It's a multifaceted team of 4, and their role is to attract foreign direct investment into Victoria, provide in-market support for Victorian-based exporters, and position Victoria as an education destination. And of course, again, because of COVID, all services are currently being delivered virtually to Victorian businesses who for some time yet will not be able to travel into the region. So make note of those names, and we're more than happy to share all the contact details you need as well for the various posts around the world, and particularly after today's session for the Americas. So what are we going to look at today? Well, today we're going to touch on freight challenges into and in the Americas. We're going to look at freight consolidation, negotiating better freight rates, offshore warehousing, and questions, of course. If you have them, more than happy to take those as you post them in the chat box. So let's look at some of those freight challenges from a more general perspective, and then specifically into and around the Americas. So, of course, there have been ongoing pandemic-related delays and closures, but there's still been a non-stop demand for ocean freight and a severe lack of capacity. And as a result, ocean rates very elevated and transit times are also volatile. There may be no relief from these high costs, long delays, and equipment shortages. And an estimated 5.5% of all ocean capacity is currently waiting outside a port. And storage space for finished goods waiting to be shipped is becoming scarce, exacerbating the already critical capacity crunch. Importers and exporters are struggling to secure capacity, get their goods on board, and get them delivered. And with the recent COVID outbreak at Yantian and the ongoing fallout of the Suez blockage, these difficulties have been magnified. And just because there's been an outbreak in China doesn't mean that it's isolated in terms of the knock-on effects. The knock-on effects are felt around the world, including on routes to the United States. Expensive and unreliable ocean freight is pushing shippers to air cargo, but of course this demand is impacting pricing and increasing the landed cost of goods. Expectations are that air cargo peak season, normally in October and November, could start in September this year, with importers rushing to make sure that holiday inventories arrive in time. And this was a very similar scenario last year, so there is a bit of form here. In addition, COVID-19 outbreaks have prompted officials at some origins to impose regional lockdowns. And of course, this is impacting factory output and volumes flowing to airports. And these tight conditions are likely to keep rates elevated for some time. So exporters are telling us that anecdotally, freight rates have increased by as much as 5 times over the past few months. And usually those increases have occurred with little or no notice. There are delays of as long as 5 months in some ports. Transit ports and routes are being changed with no warning, resulting in delays and additional costs. Significant penalty fees are being incurred, including for demurrage, as a result of disrupted schedules and delays. Last-minute cancellations on ships and the inability to get space are commonplace as a result of those blank sailings. And there is, of course, no insurance against delays. So when we turn our attention to the Americas, we have some specific problems. Asia Pacific to the US West Coast, prices increased on shipping freight by 4%, and that is a rate that makes it around 178% higher than the same time last year. Asia Pacific to the East Coast, even higher. There, the prices are around 215% higher than they were compared to this period last year. High consumer demand has pushed global air cargo volumes back to pre-COVID levels, with data showing that Asia Pacific to US rates have climbed about 25% to most destinations in April of this year, and they are remaining elevated throughout May and will probably be so throughout June and for the rest of this year. Continuing COVID-19 outbreaks in Latin America have seen workforces impacted, resulting in delays at customs and across freight and logistics networks. And of course, in certain parts of the world, we've seen third waves of the coronavirus, but in places like Latin America, it's as if there has just been one continuous wave that has continually impacted services. So if we look at some of the data that's coming out of the market, we can see that Australia to the Americas, current capacity status for air freight is significantly constrained. Trade lane capacity impacted by passenger flight cancellations is around 70 to 80% cargo reduction, and impacted by freighter cancellations, 40 to 50%. The charter situation is as normal. For ocean freight, again to the Americas, we can see significantly constrained, and there is some container and equipment shortage. Something else that is severely impacting the movement of freight from ports in the US, and of course from Victoria, our air freight goes into LAX and then from there to the rest of the Americas, but also impacting container shipping into the seaports around the US is the current shortage of truck drivers in the United States. The issue is widespread across the USA, and logistics services nationwide have had to adjust their operations in accordance with an insufficient number of drivers. Now, there are a number of reasons why this has occurred. COVID has had some impact on it, but mostly these are issues that have arisen alongside and apart from COVID, including the fact that drivers are simply aging out of the system. There aren't any younger drivers waiting to take their place. Very few women become drivers in the United States, so half of the population is pretty much ignored when it comes to attracting drivers. However, if the tendency does continue, it seems that the United States will lack around 160,000 truck drivers between 2026 and 2028, which of course means that automation better get with us very quickly. The lack of qualified drivers has had a significant impact on the transportation of freight from US ports, resulting in port congestion and long delays. And the shortage of drivers has also affected the availability of rail services because, of course, as people have not been able to get goods onto trucks away from the ports, they have sent them to rail, and that means that the rail services are severely impacted as well. So when we look at some of those management strategies of how one could possibly be dealing with issues in the United States, the first one that has certainly come to light is collaboration. And the future of collaboration is very much focused around the concept of the physical internet. So we're looking at building on last mile partnerships, where, of course, there are already notable examples of players operating collaboratively, where shipping companies, carriers like FedEx and DHL have been partnering with postal companies and small local players for many years. So that's not anything new. But the advent of new technology has made it possible for collaboration to become more dynamic and to extend from carriers to shippers themselves. So companies are starting to work together to help overcome some of the problems that are currently occurring. So the physical internet, of course, is a manifestation of the World Wide Web in physical form. For the physical internet to work in practice, companies need to be willing to collaborate far more extensively than they do today. So just as an example, there are over 500,000 distribution centers in the United States alone. And these are mostly standalone operations operated by different companies. Now imagine if just these distribution centers were to work together, how much better that could make the lives of all shippers who are trying to distribute their goods across the United States. So what is collaborative shipping? Well, it's a proactive sharing of transport. It's a bundling of freight, which isn't new again. Very few things under the sun are new, but this is exactly what logistics providers do. When companies outsource their logistics, a logistics service provider combines freight loads of its customer base if shipment times are identical and if they match geographically. Now, collaborative shipping is a little bit different in that bundling opportunities are detected prior to shipment, and if necessary, the timing of shipments can be altered to match. So collaborative shipping fits within the Physical Internet Initiative, and it's part of an open and interconnected physical internet, which is inspired by its digital counterparts. So instead of moving packets of data, we literally move packets of goods. And as the foundation of the physical internet is built around multidimensional collaboration, it complements the emerging sharing economy in which goods and services are being shared and exchanged. So some of the options around collaborative shipping: the bundling of shipments, so routes with the starting and destination point in the same area make it possible to use the same means of transport and thus increase the load factor. So if your load isn't large enough to justify going into an air container, for example, you share that load with a company that has similar goods of a similar size that work well together, so similar types of goods, and you share the load. Backhauling routes in the opposite direction, avoiding an empty return journey. Now, this is mostly domestically, but it certainly can work for you on the ground in the United States. So you collaborate with somebody who has goods that need to be collected at a point so that the hauler doesn't have to go empty to fetch. They take your goods, they have a full load going to the destination, and they then pick up the goods on that side and have a full load returning. So they are far more likely to take goods from one end to the other because no end is left empty. Round trips, of course, different routes that tie in with each other, allowing them to combine into one tour, and that also puts an end to empty miles. And again, something which is going to be of great use to you domestically in the United States. So what makes collaborative shipping work? Well, the keys are that people have to want to work together. So the potential of horizontal supply chain collaboration is largely untapped. And practice has shown that establishing an horizontal collaboration isn't straightforward, but it does hinge on finding partners who have similar business cultures, similar processes and procedures, similar shipping goals and destinations, of course, and who are leveraging technology in the same way. And of course, ultimately, if you're going to be doing this, you need a partner who is willing to share business intelligence And that means it has to be a trusted environment. So you need to be able to trust one another, because you are going to be sharing a great deal of business intelligence in order for this to work. That probably means that you're not going to enter into a collaborative shipping arrangement with a competitor, but certainly with somebody that has a product that is complementary to your own. Now, one of the keys of all of the current issues around freight and logistics is the cost involved. But there are certain things you can do, even in the current climate, to negotiate better freight rates. So, when we look at navigating the current freight market, it's important that you need to compare a number of different quotes and also different modes. So, if it's possible for you to ship via either sea or air from Australia, you need to be comparing the two and you need to see where you get the best deal. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the cheaper rate is the better rate. You need to find the most efficient service possible and you need to compare like for like. Buffer your freight budget and transit time for changes. Costs due to unforeseen delays or limited capacity will definitely arise at the moment. So be prepared for that and make sure that you've worked a buffer into the price that you've passed on to your customer. Explore warehousing options to mitigate the effects of constraints in the United States. And we're going to be looking at offshore warehousing in a moment. Also, pay attention to the profitability of your goods and consider if a pivot could be worthwhile. You might need to change what you do a little. Sometimes even small tweaks can make a business a lot more efficient, and those costs can be amortized against the higher freight costs. And remember to factor freight costs into your price at every turn. Profitability will be fundamentally affected by your freight price if you haven't factored that in. Very important for you to review all costs passed on to you by your forwarder. You need to understand what you're paying for, and you need to query anything with which you don't agree. Because at the moment, it's very much in the hands of the shippers as to what they charge. They are, or rather the carriers, they are able sometimes to get away with more than they should. So if you don't think that the price that you've been quoted is accurate, or if you've been presented with an invoice and you're not sure what all the line items are, ask. You have a right to do so, and you should do so. Consider which shipping mode is best for you right now. So what was best for you 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ago is not necessarily the case. So just as it is during non-pandemic times, ocean freight is typically cheaper, but it does have a significant lead time, even without taking into account any of the current problems. Air freight is quicker, but shortage of belly hold space has pushed prices up considerably. Now, if you look at landing in the United States and you look at the issues that have arisen with land transport in the States, you have to weigh up the pros and cons of sea and air in response to those land problems as well. Where would you best be landing your goods to make sure that they can get from the port, whether it be sea or air, into the hands of your customer? Book as early as possible. And we've talked several times over the course of this series around the necessity to plan ahead and to book as early as possible. The earlier you book, the better the rate that you will be able to determine. Communicate regularly with your freight forwarder. Now, that might seem like an obvious thing to do, but sometimes the most obvious things are the ones that really do fall by the wayside. It's more important than ever to communicate. If you stay in touch, you'll have a far better handle on your transit time, and you'll stay on top of any changes that may arise. And that means you will be forewarned and you can start taking measures to deal with the fallout. Also, leverage your volume. So the more you ship, the better your position to negotiate. The bigger the shipper, the better the price. It's just the way it always is. Regularly review your forwarding contracts and enter into multiple agreements to keep everyone on their toes. You don't necessarily need to use the services of just one service provider. Use as many as is sensible for you, and maybe you want to use different ones to different parts of the world. And of course, also have a very discerning request for price process. Now, we've talked in the past about the importance of maximizing your loads and improving your packaging, but it really does bear repeating. If you maximize your cargo loads, it will be the single most important strategy for lowering your freight costs. The more boxes or products you can load onto a vessel, the less you will end up paying per unit. Is your packaging and your packing optimized? Are you paying for empty air pockets, for example? Any unused space inside primary containers is likely to cost you money. And this, of course, is particularly so when it comes to air freight. Now let's talk a little bit about offshore warehousing. Having international warehouse space means cutting both shipping costs and shipping times. And of course, it gives you an advantage with positive customer experience in an increasingly competitive delivery market. Traditionally, choosing an international warehouse location has come down to figuring out where most of your international customers are based and selecting something geographically sensible. So in the US, you may choose LA if your customers are largely in that geographical area on the West Coast, or you might choose Houston, for example. In Latin America, you may choose Santiago. COVID-19 has shown us that convenient location is no longer the only question to consider. What happens if there are lockdowns for whatever reason in the region where your warehouse resides? Without access to your product, of course, what will happen to your business in that area? Centralized fulfillment centers now represent single points of failure that can bring your business to its knees. So think about that when you're thinking, not just geographically anymore, but where logically it makes sense. And do you now have one offshore warehouse in a location, or do you have multiples so that you can spread that risk? Other factors that you need to consider: regulations, staff facilities, health and safety standards, language difficulties when communicating with site management. So, of course, working with a third-party logistics company at an international warehouse will optimize your global logistics ability while helping optimize your supply chain. So if you've resisted setting up a business operation in another country, particularly at the moment in the United States or any one of the Americans countries, so whether it be North or South, you probably don't want to then go out and set up your own warehouse operation. You need to be using the services of a 3PL or indeed a 4PL if you want to outsource even more of the functionality of your fulfillment process. If you are choosing a 3PL, here's a checklist for you, the sorts of things that you need to be looking at, the sorts of questions that you need to be asking. So what is the area of expertise of the 3PL? They need to understand not just logistics and fulfillment, but your business and your sector. How credible are they in the market? And that you are going to ascertain by speaking to their other customers. Where are they? So what is the network of locations that they have, and do those locations suit your needs? What do they charge? And how does that price affect your bottom line? What is their customer service like? And it's very important that if you are working with a 3PL in the United States, for example, or in Latin America, or indeed in Canada, the time difference can be punishing. You need to know that their customer service operates 24 hours a day so that you can get somebody to talk to when it suits you. What's their safety record? And of course, what is their health record like when it comes to COVID? What technology do they use? Because their technology needs to be compatible with your own. It is vitally important that whatever systems and processes you are using will speak to the systems and processes of your 3PL warehouse operator. How efficient are they? So give them a task and see how quickly they are able to turn it around. And then, of course, what is their freight management capability? All very important things. And this is really just the start for you to start thinking about what sorts of questions you are going to ask.